Well, when I was a little boy sitting on my mama's.
Hello, welcome to Going Deeper. My name is Marcie Sclove, and today my guest is Dr. Jody Noe. Dr. Noe practices naturopathic medicine, specializing in oncology. She's also an ethnobotanist, focusing on the medicinal plants and ways of the Cherokee Nation, and also a traditional healer. She wrote the textbook Naturopathic Integrative Oncology, which provides an innovative model for cancer care that empowers patients to participate in their own healing process. I often describe her as an incredibly geeky scientist, as well as an intuitive medicine woman, a combination that is clearly unique.
Thank you.
This is a two-part interview. So first, let me welcome you, Dr. Noe.
Thank you. I like that description.
A geeky scientist. Yeah.
Little Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I'd like to start by just kind of setting the stage with your early life. You were born in 1959 and grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, right?
Partially.
Okay.
I was born there, and then 3 months later we moved to the West Coast.
Oh my gosh.
So for the 60s, I lived in California.
Okay, okay.
In the Bay Area, so in San Jose when it was still an orchard.
Oh, wow. And I guess what I want to focus on in terms of the early life picture is what about your childhood and your early influences informed the work that you do today and the path that you're on today?
That is a big question.
Yeah.
Well, I was born during this time for this time, and I came in knowing that, which is unusual. If you talk to young children, they have so much information that they're born with, and somehow we change that in our two-dimensional working world, or if we don't believe in it, we we say, well, that's not true, or you don't really have an invisible friend, or who knows, right? So I'm pretty strong-willed. I was born with that too. Somebody told me it was astrologically proven.
Could be, yeah, for sure.
So I was, lucky enough to keep my gifts that I was born with, and had support from other adults in my family. Not necessarily my parents, but my grandmother, who's from Sicily. So there was always herbs in my life that was normal for us to cure with herbs first, even though we didn't call it herbal medicine.
Sure.
The Italian way. And then we ate herbs, we grew herbs, it was part of our natural life during the 60s. And so when my parents divorced and we moved back to the East Coast, I got to know my southern grandmother, who was, from South Carolina on a farm. And then there was a whole nother set of herbs and lore. And to me, the lore is true.
Oh, sure.
So
yeah.
I spent a lot of time with my grandmothers, my elders.
Yeah.
And that's what I found interesting. So that geek kid
Yeah.
was the one hanging out with the old
geeky
people.
kid, yeah.
Because they had all the good stuff. They had all the good
Right.
stories and all the things I was interested in. And I talked fairly older than my age, and that allowed me to actually have communication with them. So
see.
it kind of blossomed out. But the real memory I have is that I always wanted to be a doctor.
Oh.
Always, since
Yeah.
I was a little child. And always knew I was a healer. Just didn't have a clue what that was.
How it would manifest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just believed it.
So your West Coast family was your father's side, and your father came from Sicily? Was he first generation? Did he come from Sicily?
At 15.
At 15, so you're first
I'm the
generation.
first of all the family of the Italians to be born in America.
Wow, wow. And then back
In my father's family.
in your father's
Yeah.
family, and then back in the southern eastern part of the country,
In South Carolina.
South Carolina. That was your mom's side of the family. And where did the Cherokee part come into play?
In South Carolina.
Okay.
So where my mom is from is Conway County, and that's adjacent to Myrtle Beach. In that area, they have always lived. Since I've traced my genealogy back to the 1700s.
Wow.
My mom's family and that would be my mom's side and my mom's dad's side, both lived in the same area.
Yeah.
And they still live there. But in the 50s, my mom, she's like, I got to get out of here, because it was a South Carolina tobacco and cotton farm that all the families were farmers.
Yeah.
And one side was wealthy, and they owned a general store, and the other side was from the wrong side of the tracks, my grandpa. But they all were farmers, and they farmed old-fashioned. They had no mechanism. They farmed with mules and drags and people. And so my mom went to Norfolk and went to work for the telephone company, and that's how she met my dad, who was in the Navy.
Okay.
And Norfolk is the Atlantic Fleet headquarters, and they both were dancers. So they jitterbugged themselves to each other.
That's very cool.
Yeah. My father spoke really poor broken English, and my mother was a redhead. So
Wow.
it was like Ricky and Lucy getting together there.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they made me and my 3 sisters.
Okay. 3 sisters.
So I have 2 sisters from my mom and dad, and another sister from my mom and stepdad.
Okay. And is he, what's his piece of the picture?
My stepdad?
Yeah. Was he an influential part?
Oh yeah, they got married I think when I was 13. So he was my teenage dad.
Okay.
And it still is my dad. He's the grandpa. He's, you know,
Yeah.
they've been married longer than my
Yeah.
birth parents were married.
And I read somewhere that you were at a family reunion, and it was at that reunion that you learned about your Cherokee heritage.
That's right.
You were a teenager?
I was a teenager in the 70s. We came back in 70 from California.
Yeah.
So we didn't really know our Southern family. And the South Carolinians had a big family reunion. Both sides got together. And the Stevenses, which is my grandpa, and the Stricklands, which is my grandma, all in the same area, had this big reunion. And my grandfather's sister, my Aunt Sally, came to me. And when she came to me, you know, I'm tall. And the Italians, I was like a giant.
Yeah.
And the Southerners, I'm like, how did I get so tall? All these people I was taller than my parents when I was a teenager. And so when my Aunt Sally came up, she's my great aunt, she had her daughters with her, and they were tall, and they had long hair. And we were dark, and I thought I got my skin from the Sicilians, although they weren't dark. And so my aunt came up to me and started talking to me, because my sisters and I played guitar, put a little guitar thing together, and they came up. And she told me, kind of passively and secretly, only her daughters could hear, that we had Indian blood, and that it was, you know, buried. And that was 76, 77, so I was like 16 or 17.
And then you asked your mom about it.
And absolutely no
She
Indian
denied
blood,
it.
no way, no how. You know, there were poor farmers on the wrong side of the track, but come to find out in my genealogy when I did my roots, that side of the track was the Indian side of the track.
Okay.
So a lot of Indian families lived where my grandmother's dad
So
lived.
how did that grow in you when here you are a teenager? Like, was that very cool to know that you had?
It explained a lot, but then I looked at all of the adults, and I was pretty much a rebel all along. I was very indignant about injustice, thought civil rights should have been a human right, and very vocal about it, because I grew up in California where my parents were cool. They loved beads and narrow jackets and, you know, beehive hairdos. And then when we went back to the South, we just went back in time. And I was like, oh no, I can't go there with you. So I had a lot of water I was treading when I was in high school. So I just took it in as information. I really didn't act on it too much, but it explained a lot to me. It explained a lot to me in my spiritual life as a child and my spiritual seekings as a child, because I was always a spiritual seeker. By the time I was 12, I was ordained in the fundamentalist church.
Wow.
So it was always what I was going after. So it explained a lot passively to me. It wasn't until I was in my training as a traditional medicine person, and they trained me as a white person, starting from ground zero. I walked behind 6-year-olds to start, to learn what they knew. But at the end of that training, then my teachers and elders divulged to me from spirit that my Cherokee line, and then that's where I did my genealogy.
Okay.
So they literally came to me in Seattle.
Wow.
And did a huge ceremony for me, clan raising, and first I had everything you test. So got to pass the test first.
Sure.
So I had to pass all the tests, and then they did ceremonies for me, and the elder there, who is actually my relative, told me that he was my relative.
Oh my gosh.
And I had no clue. And that was at the end of it all. So
did that come before or after the Western medicine training?
Way after.
Way after.
And I also trained with the Eastern Cherokee, so I actually belong to both tribes. I belong to the Eastern Band of Cherokee and the Western Band.
Okay.
Started my traditional training with the Eastern Cherokee, with Mary Ulmer Chitosky, and going back Chitosky, and then Mama Jean Jackson, who just recently passed over a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And I studied with them for over a year and learned the first level, we call it, of the medicine, which is the woman's medicine. So all Cherokee women learn medicine because you're the doctors of your house.
Yeah.
So when your child has a cold, or your partner has a cold, or grandma has a cold, you're making the tea. So the first level is the household medicine, the women's medicine.
Yeah.
So all Cherokee women are healers. They're the healers of the house. We teach everything from the prayers to having strawberries in your house all the time as part of the harmony of the house. And when I got through that level, I started asking the spiritual questions, because that's what I wanted, you know. And my...
Like what? What kinds of questions?
All kinds, like, okay, great, I know the medicine, and I spent years, you know, doing that, and I said, well, where's the prayers?
Okay.
You know, what direction do you collect this? I knew it was innate in me from those roots that I didn't know yet. And it's funny, because every time, as my ethnobotany training, every time I read published works in the 80s, I'm like, not really, okay, but something's not jiving with me. So I knew there was a lot of missing information in the real spiritual practice of Indigenous people, and I was living with them. So as I started asking those questions, Mama Jean, she just did her thing. She just sat me down and talked to me and did that interview. It's like a soul-to-soul interview. You can feel it here while the words are coming here. And she then called my elder, who is still alive, Crosland Field Smith, who is currently the spiritual leader of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. And he got on the phone with me, and he did that same thing. And I'm like, 20-something, you know. And I'm like, yeah, I want to know, you know. So I think my naivety and my strong will and my ability and faith and belief got me through places where other people wouldn't. Because they did not recognize me as Native. They recognized me as white and trained me to think as a Native. Because I was never trained that way. So he told me right then and there, I'm standing in Cherokee, North Carolina, poor student, dovetailing my master's degree and my bachelor's degree at the same time, you know, knowing that my time is fast, I gotta go. And he's telling me, all right, get in your car and come on out. And I'm like, wow. So I call home, get all my friends to have a dinner at my farmhouse and do a fundraiser and send me the money so I can get some gas to get to Oklahoma from North Carolina. And I went. And that first journey, I was supposed to be there on July 19th, which is the holiest of holy days for us, Katua. So my elder, Crosland Smith, is the grandson of Redbird Smith in the Ketua tradition, and that's how I was trained in my traditional medicine from Crosland. And July 19th is Redbird Smith holiday, Redbird Smith birthday, so that's like their Christmas or for Christians. And I was supposed to be there, and you know, sometimes the path has to give you a little challenge to make sure that you know you're going the right way. I hit one of those Arkansas rainstorms, and I'm from the east. I'm like, oh, why is everybody pulling over? It's just rain. I'm in my Volkswagen 1962 Bug, hydroplane.
Oh my gosh.
To a couple of 360s hit the ditch. I'm like, what? Well, I surf, so I drive that way anyway, so it was all cool. And I said, oh, that's why people are pulled over. It's a real big rainstorm. Crawled out of there, went to the gas station, pulled out my bumper, and got to Oklahoma. So I knew, I missed July 19th, but I knew that this was it was going to be challenging me. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be rewarding, but it's going to be challenging. All the things about me, you know, not only my soul, but my life, my concepts, my beliefs. You know, I was a good student. I was the student who always knew the answers.
That's how the geeky part gets.
And I was the one that they were like, does anybody else have an answer? So finally I learned to sit in the back of this class and be quiet. But, so I knew at that moment it was worth the challenge.
Wow.
So I never gave up. Just like how I got to the Eastern Cherokee was another challenge. It was literally the spirit talking like an intercom in my ear and telling me what to do. Because, you know, I'm 20-something. I want to have a blast. I don't want to drop my life and quit DJing and all the cool things I was doing, bodybuilding, and go on this spiritual track. I'm like young and still hot, not old and wrinkled. But I did it, and you know, followed spirit right to the reservation and got shut down door after door.
Wow.
And finally, after being up almost 24 hours, because spirit burnt that path in me, I had to drive that night. I went to the bookstore there in Eastern Cherokee, and I said, well, maybe this is why I'm here. And I'm an avid reader, and I bought probably this stack of books with my rent money and put them up there. And the girl checking me out was like, oh, you like Cherokee plants, and you're into Cherokee medicine. I'm like, I just about cried. I was like, yes. And I drove 10 hours, and everybody shut their door. And they said, the BIA and the council house. And she just looked at me, and I told her my story, you know, very female-like. Very emotional and warm, and, you know, spirit called me here, and she said, hold on. And she took this book, and she flipped it over. And she showed me the picture of this lady, and it was an elder lady. And she said, that lady is my grandma. And the picture below that lady's picture is the woman who wrote this book, one of the best little books on Cherokee plant medicine. Paperback. Just went back in press. She said, her name's Mary Ulmer Chetosky. Now, my grandma passed over, but Mary Ulmer Chetosky's alive. I'm going to call her up. She called her up.
Oh.
She said, Mary, I got a young girl here who's looking to study Cherokee plant medicine. Mary said, put her on the phone. So she puts her on the phone. I feel that thing. She says, you better drive up and come talk to me. And she was running a free book. She ran a free book giveaway for the reservation. And she was a teacher there for over 40 years. And so she ran a free book giveaway. I went up to her warehouse, and she sat me down, and I started giving out books. And she started asking me questions, you know, queer questions like, what's the difference between holistic spelled with a H and a WH? And I'm like, what? Okay, so well, maybe the one with a W is a hole. I don't know, you know. Maybe the one with the H is a hole. Maybe it's a hole and a hole. I guess I said the right answer, and I felt her the whole time, and she was the first one to take me in. And her husband was one of the last full-bloods of the reservation, and very well-respected artist and teacher. So it kind of blossomed from there. But
So let's go now to the sort of more straight Western, but naturopath school isn't straight Western either.
Well, it wasn't back then.
It was back then.
No, back then it was, what are you throwing your education away on? Because nobody knew in the 80s what a naturopath was.
And
we were
why
fringe.
didn't you want to go just to medical school?
Well, that's another good question. It's like you've been reading my biography that I haven't written. I went to ODU, Old Dominion University, for my, before that I went to Mission College and got a psychiatric associate's degree in California while I was out there.
Yeah.
Because I went back in the 70s and I said, hit the road to San Francisco in 1978 and did a whole bunch of civil rights, and that's another story.
Okay.
But when I came back, I was changed, and so I knew that it was time for me to start pursuing what I had been born to do, which is to be a healer and to be a doctor. So my first degree in California was psychiatric nursing. So I worked in a hospital, I did rotations, I worked in the state hospital with the duly diagnosed. And in those rotations, I just did not like the way MDs treated nurses. And you know, this was the 70s and the 80s, and so it was there wasn't PC anything, you know, it was, there was no politically correctness. It didn't exist. So I was really turned off by the system, but I was like, no, you know, I'll go do something cool. I'll change it, you know. So I came back and I went to Old Dominion at 25, started my medical school career, and was a bodybuilder and into nutrition then, already doing herbs. Started herbal medicines, my study in herbal medicines with some bootleg Rosemary Gladstar. Yeah. So shout out to Rosemary. And what I knew from my Italian grandmother. And so in that culmination of my undergraduate degree, I did an independent bachelor's, an independent studies bachelor's that was a pre-med with all the plant sciences I could put in there. Yeah. So I graduated with my bachelor's with 172 credits.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, should have got another degree, but I was already melding my master's. But as I was doing my bachelor's, they didn't have computers back then. I was microfishing. That's how you search.
That's right, I remember.
And I was in the microfiche, and I was like, you know, there's got to be some college that has some kind of nutrition thing. And I found Bastyr. It was then John Bastyr College of Naturopathic Medicine and the National College in Oregon. There were only two. And I looked at their curriculum and I said, that's where I want to go. Yeah. But in the interim, I became one of the few ethnobotanists in the 80s that actually did academic work. And that's why ODU had me stay. They offered me to stay. They gave me a teaching job and gave me lots of stipend. I was the curator of the herbarium. I was the trailblazer for their preserve. I did lots to stay for the master's to finish my ethnobotany. So my ethnobotany pursuit started as an undergraduate and melded into my graduate. And in that time, Bastyr came out twice to get me to come to school, to get me to come to med school. And that's kind of how it culminated, because Eastern Virginia Medical School, which is my local medical school in Norfolk, also solicited me, and I went for an interview. And I was pretty much a hippie. I ran the co-op, lived in the warehouse, and moved to an organic farm in Dismal Swamp. So I dressed up as much as a hippie could on her moped and went to this interview. And they were very interested in me because of my high IQ and my grade point average and my ethnobotany pursuits. And that's why they asked me to come and interview. And as we were interviewing, I was interviewing with this 3-piece suit, and I was like, you know, I just stopped the interview. I said, you know, I don't think it's going to work out. And his jaw dropped. And he's like, what do you mean? You know, they were going to offer me a spread. And I was like, you know, how many nutrition classes do you offer? Yeah. And I had just taken back in the day, only the nursing classes had holistic classes. Yeah. So I took a bunch of nursing classes in holistic healing. Kubler-Ross's work was in nursing. Wow. So I did all of that. So I did nutrition through the nursing, and I knew what I was asking, and I asked him. He said, well, we don't have any nutrition classes. And I said, well, there's the first problem. Right. And then the second problem is I'm going to probably stand up and argue a point in some organic chemistry, biochemistry class, and the professor's going to kick me out, and I'm going to get kicked out of the school anyway. So why don't I save us the trouble, and I'm going to go to the naturopathic school. And he just stood there, and I just walked out, and I felt so good.
I bet.
about that
I
decision.
feel really good about it too.
I was 20-something, you know.
That's amazing.
I had a lot of chutzpah, but
Yeah.
And then you told my mom, and she was like, "Oh my God, you just threw away your medical career.
Yeah.
Who knows what a naturopath is?" And blah blah blah. And it wasn't until Charlie on Good Morning America
Oh,
in 1992, I was already in med school.
yeah.
Did a expose on naturopathic medicine,
Wow.
and my mother called me up that day,
Oh.
and she said, "Oh, is that what you're doing?"
Oh.
I said, 2 years now, Mom.
That's amazing.
So it melded because my traditional training in medicine is in layers with my naturopathic and with my oncology as a specialty. So when a patient's in front of me, they don't know it, but I'm using all of those tools,
Yeah.
every tool I can, especially with oncology,
Yeah.
to see through the layers and the diagnosis.
Sure. Sure. What I'd like to do in part 2 is get more into the sort of specifics of the work, and so for now, I think hearing about your life and how you got to this point has been really, really helpful. And maybe we'll close now and get going on that other part.
Yeah, that's a good segue.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time for this part 1 of my interview with Dr. Noe. And we'll see you in part 2. Thank you for joining us and going deeper.